Hello, this is Top Voices podcast recording, and I'm here today we're lucky to have a very great guest, Petra Angeli. And I also obviously have Bruno here, Bruno Herrmann with me. So I'll start. I'm actually Paula McGrath, and I own and run International Achievers Group. We are a solutions recruitment partner, and we work pretty much on a customer first basis where we focus completely on what a client needs and what a candidate needs. Petra is currently the head of product and solutions enablement at Acolad Group and has almost 13 years, if I'm correct, in the industry and across a number of different roles. And then through the podcast, we're really looking forward to hearing about the different roles, how they've evolved. Perhaps if you're comfortable to share any advice that candidates might like to hear about specific advice, but that'll follow a particular path through the discussion. And then, of course, we have Bruno, the lovely Bruno Herrmann. So Bruno was one of the leading voices in the language management industry, and Bruno works with organisations of all sizes to help them expand both digitally and engage globally at scale. So, are we ready to get started? Have I missed anything?
Yeah. Let's do this.
Okay.
Yep.
So, Petra, let's start, if you're happy with that, to tell us a little bit about you, your career journey, and bring us up to your current role and explain to us what your current role involves. I know it's a recent move for you. I could actually see that through your profile, your LinkedIn profile, but you mentioned it to us earlier. It sounds interesting.
Yeah, so I'll just go all the way back to where I started, and I have to admit, I did not have a conventional journey into localization. I had a fairly unconventional entry. So I've had a very large passion for video games. In fact, I used to lead hundreds of people in raids in massive online multiplayers. And that was my first experience both with leadership and with culture, how working across time zones and across countries can be so immersive and impactful, and how diplomacy can really matter so much in how you talk to people, and when you talk to people from different cultures, what you have to be sensitive about. And you may wonder how this actually relates to my localization journey. Well, in fact, from that, I ended up getting one job in electronic arts, which was in video game localization and compliance. That was my first entry technically into localization, although it's on the client side. So I was working with several different people in language groups. So we were working on localizing at that time FIFA 13, and I was in the Hungarian group. So we were working with 18 different languages, and there were like 4 or 5 people in each of the languages. So you can imagine how culturally different that environment was and how dynamic it was. I really, really loved that environment. And so that was a great experience, and it really helped me kind of realize how I can align my passions with my career. That was the first point where I thought, yeah, this is an area I want to grow in. I wasn't quite certain if that would be particularly in video games or localization, because it was a blend of two, right? So in the end, what happened was, I suppose, again, kind of unusual. I was aiming to move on from electronic arts to work for another video games company, which was ZeniMax. They were opening an office in Galway, so I'm based in Galway in Ireland at the moment and for a long time now. And so they were opening an office at around that time, and I decided to move to Galway to try and have a chance to get a job at this company. They were about to start another MMORPG in development, and I really wanted to work on that. But funny enough, I ended up just getting another job first. So, it's kind of unexpected. Life takes its turns, but that's when I started working for an LSP. I was working back at the time for Maro Brink, which has then became ULG and now Propio. So, as you know how it goes in the localization industry. So I was working there as a localization engineer for a number of years, and truly I have a passion for learning how people do things differently in their different roles. And that's kind of how my localization journey grew. Basically, as I was in that job, I had the opportunity to grow by working with so many different roles that we are so dearly familiar with in the localization industry: software development, project management, quality assurance, both in software and also quality when it comes to documents and quality management, and ISO certifications and all that jazz. So from there, getting really close with the different stakeholders, I kind of transitioned into this IT business analyst role.
Yeah.
And that helped me learn a bit more. I was owner of different systems, different TMS systems, different CAD tools. I became specialized on XDM and, of course, tag editor Trados back in the day, really kind of diving in to the different tools that were in the environment and help grow our proprietary systems. So that was a really stressful but fun experience. Ultimately, I learned so much from it, and I'm really grateful for that experience because it helped establish that wanting to grow in this industry, I suppose. And from there, eventually I transitioned to, well, again, I have to say earlier names of companies because once again, we're kind of going through acquisitions. So to Amplexer, I transitioned in around 2016. And there too, I went through quite a few roles, but in a logical evolution.
Yeah.
Right. So when I joined, I was a technical services lead, which is somewhat similar in concept to localization engineering,
Okay.
but a little bit more working with vendors, working with desktop publishing, and managing very closely the technical aspects of localization projects alongside project managers, which helped me learn yet another area.
Yeah.
Because it requires slightly different skills. So that was a nice learning experience as well. And also working with vendors, it poses, I suppose, different challenges. You have to really work with people. You have to understand their output, their own challenges, so that you can then deliver to your clients adequately. And similar to that, working closely with clients really to guide them on the technical aspects of their projects. Because already from there on, working with clients, it's so essential that you treat them as partners because you are, as an LSP, working for an LSP. We are the experts. We are the partner to our clients. We have to be the ones to guide them on what is their best asset in terms of localization and how they can grow and how they can get to an even better shape. They don't necessarily know that from the get-go, and that's why they want to work with large LSPs at the end of the day, right? So already then I had the opportunity to work alongside with the project managers, but directly with the clients, and I used to work on the more complex technical projects, really working with CMSs that have been challenging to extract data from and to get that back. There have been all these finicky projects in there, which for some it can be frustrating. I quite enjoyed them personally because you really have to figure out how you can solve problems. And I suppose that also is one reason that I ended up with my systems analysis and product management roles as we moved along in my career, because in product management, which is very close to solutions, you're really looking at how you can solve problems with technology, how you can address all these issues that clients come to you with and find the right solution and create technology which will help them be efficient. And beyond clients, we also grow internal systems, which I've already done in my earlier positions, the internal TMSs, so that we have that project management aspect really streamlined, the workflows orchestrated, automated to reduce the human effort. So already back then, although not with LLMs, not with AI, that was already a very, very strong concept.
Yeah.
And in fact, when we talk about Acolad, there has been AI research in particular since around 2016 already. So it's not a new area for us. It is now so much more in the public eye, and there is so much more focus on it, and it's rapidly developing, of course, but it is not new, in fact. And so for me, when it comes to product, that was around the time that we established the product organization in Acolad. So along this journey, now I refer to it as Acolad because there was an acquisition, right?
Yeah, I know.
Amplexer has been acquired by Acolad throughout my career as well. And when it comes to product, I have experienced in my career that it wasn't really a well-established department or a typical department in localization. I'm not sure if you guys have this same perspective. It might be still kind of pigeonholed for me, but I kind of noticed that as I was going through these companies, these journeys, product wasn't really a typical department to have in localization. There used to be developers, but not necessarily an associated product org. And
I suspect it was a cost issue for a lot of organizations.
certainly,
So everybody, not everybody, sorry, smaller organizations, have to pass that type of a business process outside the business because it's so expensive to bring it in-house, and it's just the larger organizations that honestly can afford to have it. That's what I've seen.
you are absolutely correct in that. We had to, at several times, we had to justify why it matters for that very reason. The same way as if you want to bring in another tool into your workflows, you do have to justify what's going to be the benefit. And it was kind of similar as I kickstarted the product org in Acolad, for instance. And yeah, it's not exclusive to this organization, but that has been years ago. And in fact, of course, the benefit was quite clear over time. And having product people, having truly experts on the technology, being able to grow the technology with the right strategy and the right vision is essential. Because that's the one way that you can truly bring the company forward. And now, today, we can especially see it with the evolution of AI.
That's
You
right.
need that kind of expertise and that hands-on touch, I suppose.
It also affords, it can afford an advantage,
Yes,
a market advantage. It can afford that.
I completely agree. Yeah, so with that, I was one of the first being in product within this organization, and I ended up growing this organization. So that's pretty much the journey that you can see with my different roles as I grew into a product lead, a product director, and the VP of product as both the organization grew, because not unsurprising, I suppose, when you're growing through acquisitions, you end up with an insane technology stack. And you need to be able to manage that. And you need to be able to figure out what's the right path on that journey. What is it that you need to keep? What is it that you need to grow? How do you grow that? And that requires knowledge, that requires time and investment. So there it was so valuable to have these product people who are so motivated. You need that kind of personality that is really willing to yeah, to take the challenge to learn whatever comes along the way and to find the solutions, I
Yeah.
suppose.
I always think that the level of success can depend heavily on the combination of aptitude and attitude. No, that's a little bit black and white, I know that, but I think the combination of those two, if you're fortunate enough, I don't know if fortunate is the right word, but to have that, and it would appear that you have that, because you've obviously succeeded in this path. So I know Bruno's more capable than I am to ask you questions around the technical stack that you mentioned, and where you've landed, and how did you end up deciding where to land. So this is more Bruno's field than mine.
Yeah. No, and of course, I have some questions for you regarding your experience from a more technical perspective. But before that, I would like to ask a question about what you just said, because you made a very interesting journey, very diverse, very rich in a way. But I really liked some words that you used, like partnership, solutions, and a few other ones. And this is so important to me. Solutions is very important because obviously this is something that super agencies like Acolad can do, not of course the middle size or the small size suppliers. And to be honest, I started my career in probably in the opposite way as yours. I started on the supplier side and then I moved to the client side. And the reason why I moved to the client side was that I realized that when I was working in LSPs, mid-size LSPs, there was a lot of, I would say, frustration or a lack of satisfaction from clients that those LSPs were just vendors. They were not partners. They were, just delivering in a very transactional way. Give me your content, I'll put it in 5 languages and I'll send it back to you. And throughout my career, I worked in different big organizations. Now I'm consulting, but before that, I worked many, many years in multinational organizations. I realized that when I had to select a supplier, it was very hard to find a supplier who could come to a meeting, not even to a bid defense, just a meeting. And that company would say to me, how can I solve your problem? And how can I be a partner? They were immediately focused on, their capacity, their capabilities, without actually engaging with me in a way that was more solution driven. So the question that I had for you, because now you are very focused on solutions, is when you interact with clients, not just when you have already clients, but when you are responding to an RFP, for instance. Let's say that you are in a bid defense meeting. How do you sort of highlight the importance of Acolad being a solutions driven company, and you are the example of that, rather than just another vendor?
Well, so what is really essential in this is that first and foremost, you need to understand your client. You need to take the time to not just, shove a product out there or talk about your services. No, you need to understand what is the problem that you're trying to solve? What is the workflow that they are going through today? What kind of suppliers they are working with today? Because sometimes when a client comes in, they might have something in their mind. Oh, this is the problem. This is how we see the world. This is what we want to get a solution for. But actually, that's not truly the problem. So you kind of really have to dig down into understanding the job to be done. What is it that they are trying to get done, and how are they trying to do that right now? So then we can assess what we can offer as a solution, not just from what their perspective of the problem is, but from the expertise that we can bring. And actually, in product management, this is also such an important element where you're talking to different stakeholders. You're getting the business requirements, and people always have their perspective of an issue.
Yeah.
But they don't see the bigger picture. It's difficult. It's difficult when you are in a specific role. You have a hard time to see the bigger picture of why something works a certain way, or why somebody is trying to speak a certain way or do a certain workflow. And that's where we can step in as experts and partners to, first of all, take that knowledge, to talk, to understand, and to convert that into actually useful solutions to our clients, to introduce what we can do based on their feedback, based on their problems.
I think the other thing as well, when any organization is lucky enough to outsource its needs to an LSP in this case, the other thing as well, you mentioned earlier that the client is getting the benefit of your expertise and your team's expertise and the whole company's expertise, directly or indirectly. What they're also getting is the fact that you have exposure to their competitors, you have exposure to the whole marketplace, and you have a knowledge, and you and your team and any of the LSPs or any of the suppliers have a knowledge that sometimes what's happening in the marketplace, what may have worked out, you're never ever going to be indiscreet about a competitor or another client, but you actually have the subconscious knowledge that has been garnered from the fact that you work in the market. And that has to be very helpful to any client.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. And I think what I would comment on that is, although I agree with you that that is beneficial, I think what can be at the same time challenging is that people often forget that not everybody knows the same things as what they know,
Yeah,
right?
that's a good point.
And so you really have to sometimes think about how you convey a message and what is information that might be valuable to your customers or to yourself, in some cases, to your team, as you grow. So although you might have knowledge and that might be valuable to you, especially when talking to clients, you definitely don't want to undermine competitors. That's not valuable to anybody. But you also have to put into perspective where your solutions might benefit the clients better and why, and that you can use that knowledge to put that into that perspective, I suppose.
I actually believe, from a business perspective, the ability to contextualize is actually one of the greatest skills, and I think it is seriously underestimated. I don't think that a lot of people are always able to contextualize, with the information that they have. And then if you're not able to contextualize, you're definitely not able to maximize the use of the knowledge you have. That's my own personal thought.
Yeah, and also you mentioned, Paula, you mentioned, Petra, your journey in the world of suppliers, in the localization industry. If you had to convince someone, a young person just graduating from a university, that the localization industry is a great place to be and to work, what would you say? What sort of adjectives would you use to tell that person, yes, the localization industry is a great place because I enjoyed this, or I could do that? What are the keywords that you would use? Because the localization industry is sometimes, well, I'm soft here. It's often overlooked, underestimated, because everybody talks about the marketing industry or, the advertising industry. There are many industries, but when you look at the list of industries, localization on forms, your localization industry is sometimes not even mentioned. So what would you say to these young people or less young people, somebody as old as me, for instance? And what would you say well, yes, come to the localization industry because, and of course I anticipate that you are going to talk about the people, but also, talk about the companies and talk about the technology. But what would you say first to that person?
Well, it will be a cliche, but I do like the mission of the localization industry of essentially tying cultures together and getting people together to connect. In the end, that's human nature, and that's something that is just very near and dear to my heart. So I think that in terms of a mission, that's already a very good one. But what I would also add to that is, you did mention a few other industries, and I find that working in localization depending on your role, depending on the company, of course, but you kind of get to have the chance to get a bit of insight into other industries. For instance, for me, being able to work with customers in the life sciences industry and getting to see their challenges, it's so fascinating. And how that ties into localization, yet another really fascinating aspect, because you can actually impact people's lives. And that's something really important to understand. Localization isn't just translating text from A to B. It actually has an impact in the world, and that's truly valuable. So that's one part. But yeah, again, you can work with so many different clients in so many different industries with different roles. And so I think it just opens up the world all a little bit more. People are just not as familiar with it. And especially in Ireland, I have to say, people are not as familiar with what localization is. But I think we can work a bit more on that.
And funnily enough, Ireland actually is actually compared, per capita, Ireland actually has a lot of language management specialists. When you can look at the size of the island, there's a lot of people that are in the language management industry in Ireland, even though it's a tiny little island.
Yeah.
So, and I know culturally we might not be always, some people might not be as open-minded or as informed, but an awful lot of Irish people travel more now. I don't know why I'm going down this road. Can I, completely unrelated to your job, are you still a gamer?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Do you know what I was picturing? I was picturing a mum and a dad. I don't know what your family situation is, and I don't want to hurt or cause any hurt here to anybody, but I'm thinking about a mum and a dad with their lovely daughter, and with great careers ahead. I'm just picturing my poor parents who are since dead, but they'd have had a heart attack had I said, "Guess what? I'm going to be a brilliant gamer." I think they'd have had a heart attack. I admire that in anybody. I don't have that freedom in my head. Completely unrelated, but it's a question that crossed my mind.
I don't know. I mean, when it comes to video games, it's very particular. I remember, so I am from Hungary originally, right? And as I was growing up in the 90s, it wasn't as prevalent, there weren't so many PCs in the households.
Oh, yeah.
Video games weren't as big. I had the opportunity, since my father was in technology, to have a personal computer at home as I was growing up and to start playing video games early on. And, as I was in my teenage years, you could see esports growing, and it was just so, it's a completely different world, especially being Hungarian. It was never a reality to be in the video games sports
industry.
So that's never been close enough to me. But that's also why, realizing that there is a profession around there is the video games industry, which is kind of in touch, and there is a possibility around there, was interesting to me to see. With that said, and here again, we're talking about industries. If I compare video games industry versus localization industry, one is much more shiny and lucrative from the outside, but actually it's really difficult to get into, first of all, and second of all, it certainly isn't monetarily as worthwhile as localization industry. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
You have a much harder time to grow in that industry, from what I've seen and having talked to people. I don't know if that evolved any differently in the last 10 years, but yeah.
Yeah, I like picture speak from a sort of a fairly narrow field. In my case, recruitment. People in the last few years in the gaming end of localization have struggled to keep their jobs. That's all I can comment on it. But I also, I'm just thinking about the comment I made about my parents. It's a it's a generational difference, I think, as well. I think it's an amazing industry. I think any industry that can create employment and create opportunities for people, as long as obviously there's no harm being done to other human beings. I think it's amazing that it evolves, and it's amazing that people can create a market, and it's amazing that young people can get in and stimulate themselves and stay busy and make friends and create, live a life. It was just that I don't, unfortunately, have the freedom in my head. But that, again, is a generational difference, I think.
I think anybody can get into it. You just have to
yeah, I
find
know.
the right one that
I
aligns
know.
with you. You know,
I-
it can give so much. It's fascinating how much people can undermine what video games can give you. And that's also why I started with my example of what I learned in leadership and just getting communities, large communities together. I mean, trying to motivate over 100 people for 8 hours straight for a common goal, that's not something you really get to do in a professional life until you have climbed the career ladder over however many years. Like, that's not something you get to do.
I agree.
But, I could do it in my early 20s, so that really is something that you gain, or even just accuracy. And there are a bunch of things you can learn from video games that I think people really underestimate.
And fun competitiveness. I mean, I also, again, truthfully, I know next to nothing about gaming other than the industry side of it and the business side of it, because that's more where my brain goes to. But I actually think it's fantastic that there are platforms and environments for individuals who can thrive in that environment but might not thrive in other environments. And I think that really would be a laudable goal for us that are able to create things. And I couldn't create that. I don't have that skill set, to create environments. And yeah, I'm completely gone off track here. Sorry.
No, it's an interesting point. I mean, I don't know just a bit, or I know just a bit about the gaming industry. So interesting to hear about it because it's I was a gamer when I was a teenager, but not after that. It's very strange that I quit suddenly, being a gamer. But I actually, Petra, I just wanted to circle back on what you said about the mission of the localization industry.
Yeah.
And I totally agree. I agree even 200% with what you said about the impact on the business and beyond the business, so on people, specifically in life sciences. That's the industry that I'm in. So I totally agree with you. There is no better example of impact on humans than in the life science industry. But I learned a few lessons over the past 30 years in this community. So supplier, client, and supplier. And one of the lessons that I learned was that to be able to work with clients, suppliers, suppliers that want to become partners. No, I'm not talking about suppliers that want to stay or that want to remain just vendors, transactional vendors, but the real partners. They need to be not just solutions oriented like you are, but also they need to, from a very practical perspective, from a very strategic perspective, they need to be able to demonstrate the value of solutions, in your case, or products in other functions. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, my experience, is to not just to demonstrate the value as such, but to demonstrate the value by integrating the solution into the client environment, into the client, what I call the ecosystem. The ecosystem being, of course, the people, the processes, the business processes, and the tech stack of the client. And that's, again, in my life, I met quite a few, and I should say just a few suppliers who could do that. They were selling solutions. They were telling me that they could work with me and my team to actually integrate and I would say elevate the solutions that they had in my client environment. So would you say that if you were not in a role of solutions or before in product management, would you say that it would be also easy for you to actually demonstrate that value if you were just a business development manager, for instance? Because in my opinion, it's more difficult for these traditional roles like, PMs or BDMs, etc., to demonstrate the value rather than your role, which is solutions driven. And you can actually, not only talk about solutions, solving problems, but you can also make one step further, if I can use that term, and say, yes, I can not only sell you solutions, but I can make sure that the solution is going to be integrated, embedded in your environment, because you the client, you have already an ecosystem, and it's up to me, your partner, to fit into that. Would you say that your role is, for that matter, that your role is easier than, for instance, for a business development manager?
I would say yes. I would agree that it makes it easier, because if you're in that environment and you know what the expectations are, you are going to have a bit of an easier time. And you've seen how these systems evolve and how you can integrate. So of course, in principle, it is easier. But I would also want to add there that when it comes to these other roles, BDMs, PMs, account managers, it's also about enabling them to understand what is the value that we can bring as an organization. And maybe they won't be able to do exactly the same, but that's also where having a technical partner or having a technical account manager or a solutions enablement lead or solutions lead, whatever the role is, because it can differ depending on company, it can be really, really valuable. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't support the other departments, the other roles, to be able to talk about the value, to be able to have an idea of what a company can bring to get the right conversation started.
We obviously recruit for a number of different organisations, and they have different sizes and different cultures. And some organisations are extremely good at developing a culture of collaborative interaction within the LSP themselves, which means that even though you might not have the luxury of having 40 people on every team, the fact that the culture is encouraged, that the BDMs and the account managers are happy to come and talk to specialists like you. But it takes effort to develop a culture like that, because people are very, career focused, particularly when, the market is tight. Anyway, it's just, I think it can work as well if smaller organizations can foster that culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's about having that transversal and overlapping environment. You need to, indeed, as you said, foster that environment where people can truly collaborate. And I'm not saying that this has to be in an office, for the record. I think doing this remotely is absolutely possible too. And in some cases, this can be even more productive if you have everybody spread out globally. But for instance, and I think this can still apply in smaller companies, but for us, we have dedicated sales enablement. And with my current role, I'm in product and solutions enablement. So it is really to tie this knowledge together. Yes, mainly to support clients to realize the value, but it's also about supporting these teams to be able to get that insight, to be able to feel in touch with what we are bringing, with how things are evolving in the technology, with the solutions, and what value we as an organization can bring. So that is part of it, in fact. And I think that that should be a focus for every LSP, because that's where you get the right and productive conversations going.
There's been surveys done on and off over the years, within organisations where, members within an organisation are asked to identify their key stakeholders. And what came out years ago was that the employees' colleagues weren't even listed. There was no malice intended. It was just wasn't. They didn't recognise it. They didn't realise that my colleague is a stakeholder. I actually need to do what I can so that that way the organisation. Now, the last time I actually read an article like that is a number of years back. So I think there's much more awareness now about the importance of collaboration, or the importance of organisations making sure that the team members are clear what the company goals are. Because that was also a shocking result, what came out years ago, where employees didn't know what the company goals were. Anyhow, there was just sometimes people don't realise that their best stakeholder is actually their colleague.
Yeah, I can speak for that a little bit as well, because honestly, having seen all these acquisitions and cultural differences between offices, between companies that have been acquired, it can be a difficult journey. And let's not even talk about the tech stack. I did mention that already. But for instance, with Acolad, we have gone through a long journey to create that brand identity, to create that messaging and openness, and to get feedback from employees to understand how people relate to the company, to each other, to the strategy. And that's something that is a continuous journey. And you can really, really see how this shapes the organization and what benefits it has. And it also goes with marketing messaging all the way to customers, because once you can communicate a common message, it will be easier to then talk about the value as well.
Do you have a big team? Do you manage a big team of
So
people?
I was managing under product management when I was VP. I was managing let's say, depending on the time, 10 to 15 people,
Okay.
with different products underneath, different sizes of sub-teams. At my current role, I don't manage a team per se. I work with large departments like sales and account management and global accent. So I work with a number of different teams around enablement, which is fairly different, very exciting actually, because it's a different angle of engagement. It's much more reminiscent to that. I suppose I can kind of refer back to almost like the technical services example where I gave, where working with clients, you really can be solution focused and you really can be engaging with people on that level of what are we trying to do here? How can we solve that? And how can I make sure that you are aware of why we are doing this and how we can bring that further, whether I'm talking to a BDM or
Yeah.
whether I'm talking to a client. So right now, I'm not managing a team directly, but that just enables a little bit more
Yeah.
openness towards solving problems.
Do you miss the team management, the direct team management? Or are you glad to have a little bit of a break? Because it's difficult, it's hard work to do it well.
I love. Okay, this will sound strange. I just love working in general.
Yeah.
I love any kind of job that I do. So it isn't a better or worse. To me, it's different.
It's
I
different,
actually enjoy
yeah.
both. But to answer your question, I sort of do miss it because it has a different element to it when you're, and I really love doing that, when you're focused on growing people.
Yeah.
And especially in product, you're working with people who are just so engaged and so willing to learn. It's having that aptitude to just be thrown into anything, and that's really motivating in a way, working with people who are willing to do whatever to make the best possible technology. I really love doing that, and then working with them to grow on a personal level and on a career level as well. I really like doing that because it helps me engage with people even closer on a personal level within the career. So I do like that aspect as well.
I'm
As I
very,
said, both is
yeah,
good.
I know. I mean, I have to say we're very lucky. We have a very good team, but sometimes I speak with team leaders who working with teams, post M&A mergers and acquisitions, and trying to manage teams in those situations can be extremely challenging. That was a thought. That was actually more what I was thinking about when I asked that question.
Yes, there is that aspect of corporate change and the turbulence in the market and what have you. There are so many things that can make it challenging to manage people.
Yeah.
To your point, yes, there is that as well. And that's something that you can have to work through and grow with it. I think organizational change and personal change, that is part of it. And yeah, that helped also contribute to my personal growth and how I experience this, because there are a lot of things that you learn from going through it yourself. Whether you are an employee or a manager, you learn different things. So yeah, good point.
And well, Acolad is a very global company, right? So There are offices in many, many countries. Even in my country, in Belgium, they have an office, which very few LSPs have an office in Belgium, strangely enough. But when I was looking at the map and all your offices, I was just wondering from your perspective, so you, from your role perspective on solutions, what are the hotspots in the world? In other words, what are the most dynamic countries or regions in the world where you, as a solutions leader, you are involved, engaged in innovation programs or implementation of solutions? Do you have some hotspots, like as I said, countries or regions where you see a lot of activity around solutions implementation, for instance?
That's interesting.
That's a tough question because I suppose you could look at it from different perspectives. I'm not sure if so when you say solutions,
Hmm.
do you mean in terms of development? Do you mean in terms of people and talent, or in what way? Just so
I'm more looking at the perspective of deployment and implementation. So you, when you are engaged as a solutions leader, where do you see, the biggest opportunities? Where there are people, clients, that are really willing to, move forward. It can be related to cultures. It can be related to the economy, of course. But I'm just wondering, from your perspective, if you had to, highlight a few countries or regions where you see the biggest opportunities for you and your company now to implement solutions. Where would you go?
All right, so the US is always a good example, but that of course makes sense mainly because of the size of it as well. There are a lot of clients out there that we are engaging with and that we are working on really interesting solutions with. That will remain the case, I foresee. We, of course, have also a large presence within Europe, and there, depending on the country, things can be different, right? Clients have different attitudes also depending on which country we're talking about, different expectations also when it comes to quality. And here I'm not even talking about industry of clients, but just actual cultural differences on how and what they expect. But within Europe, of course, we are working with a number of clients that are very solutions focused. Perhaps in Germany, you could also consider the Netherlands or France. But yeah, it's all over. It is very global. I wouldn't necessarily be able to say, these are the forefront, but these are the ones that come to mind.
Okay.
And then from the people resourcing side of it, where are you focusing at the moment? Where do you find that the contemporary talent that's needed?
Well, we are still, we are very global. We
right.
have always been very global, but especially when it comes to technology, we have a fair few of the talents based in France. That might also be related to our headquarters being in France, but even before, when the acquisition hasn't happened yet, so Amplexer, our developers were mainly based in France.
Yeah.
So we have been growing teams there for a significant amount of time.
That's interesting.
No, it's certainly good to have a picture, a map of where people are, because indeed, I mean, talent might be everywhere those days, but surprisingly, that's always been a sort of surprise to me in the localization industry, specifically in Europe, not in North America, not in Asia, but in Europe. You have a few cities that are attracting, most people. It's Barcelona, Dublin, a little bit Amsterdam. And if you are in Copenhagen or if you are in Vienna, it seems that it's very hard to find a job there. I'm talking about companies that are not working remotely. So you mentioned that, of course, today with digital, we should always all of us should be able to work remotely, at least to a large extent. But surprisingly, when you look at the job ads or the recruiters, and Paula can confirm that, most jobs are based in Europe in just a few cities for the localization industry, which is not the case for other industries. If you are working in the marketing industry, you can find a job in Copenhagen, in Helsinki, in Vienna, or in Belgium, from my country. But if you are the localization industry, most jobs are located in a few cities. And if you are not there and we are in 2025, so talent is everywhere. Talent can be in Austria, it can be in Finland. So, and why would you force people to go to Barcelona or to go to Dublin or to go to another city? By the way, it's not, I'm just using a few examples. It is, for me, this is a little bit of a mystery about the localization industry. Why, compared to other industries, we are now in the digital age and we should be able to work remotely. There is still this old practice of bringing people together in some parts of Europe. And in the US, you can be in Kansas, you can be in Chicago, you can be everywhere in the US. People are just happy to work there.
I know, but you need to be able to then globally be able to influence tax legislation and legal presence legislation, because that is what is restricting some of the hiring companies. It's for a legal and tax infrastructural purpose that can restrict where some companies can hire. So people have to have a physical presence in a particular jurisdiction purely for tax and legal jurisdictional purposes. So, and sometimes what we find from a recruiting perspective, we have that challenge too. And then we have the opposite. But we find that smaller organizations have a little more flexibility around quickly establishing a new legal jurisdiction. Whereas it's like everything. It's like trying to turn a big tanker is much more difficult than trying to turn a little tugboat. But then sitting on the big tanker can have many, many more advantages than trying to survive on a little tugboat. It's like that is where the restrictions lie.
Yeah, but on the other side, I think as we are growing and as smaller companies become one large company,
I know.
doesn't that kind of add up to both? So at least when it comes to Acolad, we have legal presence in so many countries throughout the world, and so I don't necessarily have that experience that you described, Bruno, where it's difficult to hire. I personally have been working remotely since I joined Acolad and Blacksir since 2016 in the west coast of Ireland, in the little town of Galway, and I never really had a challenge with that. And actually, most of my team within product, not two of them were in the same office. We had people in Spain, in Germany, in the US, in France, and even today, a lot of the people, when I say France, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are sitting in the same location or that they are working from an office. And I fully agree with you that is absolutely viable. There are certain elements of human contact and connection that are necessary. So getting together once in a while, doing workshops, that is amazing. And I think that's something very important. But in order to grow and to create a successful business, I don't think it's necessary for everybody to be in one location or in one particular city.
Yeah, and Acolad is a great company for that, because Acolad shows that it's absolutely possible to be, geographically present in many countries, and that you don't concentrate only in a few cities for a number of reasons. You mentioned, Paula, tax reasons, etc. Because today, personally, the organizations I work with, they have a budget. They recruit for a position, they have a budget which is, let's say 45k euros. Then they use this budget to hire wherever it is. It can be in Norway, it can be in Greece, it can be, and talent is more important than location. That's what I mean. And Acolad is a great example, but not every company in the localization industry is like Acolad. It's still very probably it's an old practice before digital when people had to be in an office physically, which and I knew that period. I'm old enough to remember when I had to be in an office physically. But now, I mean, today it's just remote first should be a rule because talent is, and Paula, you know, talent is everywhere, right?
Oh boy, are they everywhere? But the thing as well, but is this not just sort of more of a generic point that the strong survive? And the strong are those that can adapt. And I don't mean the strong only being the large ones. Sometimes teeny tiny organizations are strong. So, you know, unfortunately, if people don't adapt or find their niche, they just don't survive. And so that's why, you know, you're now working for a company called Acolad, and you started out less than 10 years ago working for a company called Amplexer. You know, so 10 years in an economic cycle is actually, well, it used to be very short. Now, of course, the economic cycles are shortening. But that's what's going to happen. If organisations cannot flex to facilitate where the talent is that they need to survive in this climate and next year's climate and the year after that, they're not going to survive. Or they find a niche that is happy to work with that arrangement. But that's a generic economic discussion and a business survival discussion, truthfully.
Yeah. No, it's
frustrating. I know it is.
Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. But I had a question since I have someone today, a guest, who is very, very deep into solutions. You mentioned AI, and I totally agree with you. It's not a new thing. I worked with data and artificial intelligence back in 2008 when I was in the BI world. So the BI industry used AI way before even the localization industry. But no, my question is more about data. We know that data is the lifeblood of AI. So there is no effective AI without effective data. So I'm just curious how in your solutions role, how you are positioning data to clients who might not be so specialized into data management, because of course some companies, and specifically in life sciences, I know sometimes I'm talking to people who are not so versed into AI or data management. So I'm just curious to know how you, as a solution leader, just position and explain the importance or the value of data to clients who might not be so expert.
Right. So, of course, the importance of the data that comes up in several conversations. Very traditionally, data, we also have to consider translation memories that are assets, and that's not related to AI, but it is ultimately data that we want to leverage and that we want to make sure that the clients continue to be able to leverage despite AI and LLMs taking the forefront, or not despite, but maybe eventually in conjunction or replace. That's a whole different conversation. But first of all, making sure that that asset can continue to be leveraged. Then the second part of the conversation, how LLMs come about, what are the risks of using LLMs? How does their data get used when it comes to LLMs? These are always conversations that show up, especially depending on the industry of the client. You did mention regulated industries. Yes, absolutely. This is a concern that not only comes up, but that people have to talk about how LLMs can be used and AI can be used ethically. And although there will be more and more regulations, the EU AI Act, I think that will continue to be more in forefront because you see DeepSeek coming up. There are a lot of conversations about data privacy. What is it that you can trust? What is it that you cannot trust? How can we make sure that everything remains safe? And at the same time, how we can continue to train these engines in a way that we can reuse data in a better and better and better way. So in the end, we're probably going to be talking about, and that is coming the same way as adaptive MT, adaptive LLMs, how we can retrain and make sure that as their data is fed in and we go through the localization process, that it can learn from what has gone in, and how we can then re-leverage in an even better way, in an even better quality. There also, we have to talk about where the human comes into play.
Yep.
And that's a slightly different topic, but I think it's still an important one to bring in. Because when we talk about AI, although it's evolving very rapidly, I think we have to make sure that we don't forget that it's not yet perfect. It's not a silver bullet. We cannot consider it to replace humans. And even just to give an example, if you try to talk to an AI, it's not going to feel exactly human. If you, let's just say, for instance, there might have been a diplomatic event where they used AI interpretation. I think that happened a few years ago, and it just interpreted things with a completely different tone, and people took offense to it. And so they had to completely retract AI from the process and replace them with human interpretation. The same way for the standard localization flows, AI is not yet bulletproof. The level of quality has to be continuously assessed. How your data goes through that. They need to have understanding of what happens with their data, with their documents, with the information, how that gets transformed, how they can get the right quality out. And that's all part of that journey and that conversation that we tend to go through to not only describe to them what goes into it, what are the elements, how we can ensure that they get what they expect, but also, as I mentioned before, we need to understand their expectations of it. And so depending on their industry, that might be completely different. You might have very, very stern expectations when it comes to pharmaceutical life sciences. You might even not be okay at all to use AI, and that's where the guidance from us can come into play. There are certain requirements where, no, it would not be up to par to ISO regulations unless you have one or two humans in the loop, and that's just that. Sometimes it's not acceptable to even involve MT or LLMs, depending on what the regulatory requirement is. So that was a bit long-winded, and I'm not sure if I fully answered your question.
It's great. I mean, it's a great perspective. I think your answer was long, but it was very comprehensive. And I think that you're absolutely right. There is no silver bullet. It depends on the expectation. It depends on the industry a lot, because specifically in life sciences, again, I'm preaching for my church here, but in life sciences, you have a number of requirements that are not just related to effectiveness or quality, that are also related to compliance and regulations. And of course, that makes a mix that is very challenging, I would say, for any organization. But and that's the reason why there are a number of organizations now in life sciences that are moving to SLMs, which are the small models or the specialized models, because it's cheaper and it's more precise. So there are a number of benefits. But I think, Paula, there is also, you see that in the recruitment world, there are a number of AI roles that are popping up in the localization industry. That's very interesting.
Yeah. Do clients ever ask for their data back? Because I went to LT Innovate, in Vienna last November, and there was a big focus. I was over a 2-day conference. Bruno was one of the speakers. One of the most interesting conferences I've ever been to. But there was a big focus and discussion around the whole protection of privacy and GDPR. That wasn't the only focus. There was obviously huge discussions around, the latest innovations. But I remember on I think it was the last session of the 2 days, there was a panel there was lawyers, somebody from the EU. So very, very interesting. And they were talking about, the protections that are in place. And of course, there's the new EU legislation, for protection, AI protection. And honestly, the whole legislation is too young and won't have been tested. Well, sorry, of course there are a few test cases, but that probably happened even before the EU Act, where there was GDPR breaches. But a thought across my mind just listening to you guys chatting was: do clients ever ask for their data back? So do they ever actually say, "Can I have that back, please"?
So and this is just from my experience, so it might not be representative. When it comes to the usage of LLMs, it's perhaps in too early stage, so I haven't really heard that very frequently.
Okay.
Now, if I think about the evolution of the industry and how clients, of course, want to leverage their assets, and the way that, in the end, translation memories often, of course, are the assets of our customers and they get it back, that would be very typical. I wouldn't be surprised if eventually that would be something that would make sense to do.
Where it's going to go, yeah. I was just curious.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's one of the many questions that are still not really answered by anyone. It's just, as you said, Petra, it's just moving so fast. Then sometimes you are just running after the innovation. You are running after the what's going on, and you are not sort of always in synchronization with the evolution of this game changer, which is called AI. So there are so many implications. But there is one thing that you mentioned as well, Petra, which is the role of human in this whole thing. Because of course it's very tech oriented. Every time we spoke about AI, in conversations, it was about data, which personally I love, but also about, tech ecosystems and, integration with other tools like CMS and LMS, etc. But, I tend to say, and Paula knows that, in my personal view, so it's not representative, but in my personal view and in my current practice as a consultant, I insist a lot on human supervision or human overlook, not just at the stage of post-editing or enriching the content once it's output, but I say, and this is for me a big asset, a big value for the localization industry, that human supervision starts very upstream, which is when data is created, when prompts are created. Because for many people in the AI world, they see the role of the localization industry as, we'll give it to the localization industry because they are the language experts, and they will just look at the output and they will tell if the output is okay. But for me, the localization industry has a role to play in language data management and in prompt engineering, because if you give that, and that's my personal experience, so I'm not giving any advice here, but if you give the ownership, I should say, the ownership of language data and prompt engineering to data scientists only, they will probably miss a few things, because data scientists are experts in data management, but they are not specifically experts in language management. So my usual advice to clients is to tell them, make data scientists and language experts work together from the beginning. So from the time when language data is created and maintained, then to prompt engineering, and then of course to I would say post-editing, enrichment, whatever you call it. Do you see it the same way from your practice, or would you say, oh no, Bruno, I have a very different experience?
No, I actually completely agree with you, and it's good that you bring that up, because I can talk about what we do and what we are focused on. We have recently rolled out our new LEA platform that you might have heard of. So this is, of course, LLM and AI powered platform, which incorporates automatic post-editing and automatic quality evaluation using LLMs. And why this comes into play here, it is because we have put a lot of effort into really emphasizing how we can get these to the right level and evaluating that. Yeah. So in fact, what you're saying, having data scientists and AI researchers working with language experts is what we are doing.
Perfect.
There is the first point where you have to fine tune the prompts. You have to make sure that you collect the data so that you can evaluate how does that actually improve? How is the quality estimation and how you can improve that even further to get a better accuracy? And we have these teams working together with the language excellence team to actually evaluate the output and then further fine tune and to get it to better and better and better and better stage. And I'm not going to say that it's without challenges. All of this is still an evolution, but I think it's very critical to go through these steps because you cannot just blindly rely on, first of all, just the AI as it is.
Yeah.
That's hands down a bad decision. And you cannot just rely on a data scientist to make a prompt and then go off. Of course not either. You actually need the language expertise. And add to that, beyond the language excellence team, you also need the evaluation. So I think for the time being, while we are still in this rapid phase of evolution, having that human oversight that you mentioned to make sure that the output is matching the right quality is essential. There have been, there are a number of clients that already think, I can just take AI and replace my entire localization team tomorrow. But actually, that's not really true. And I think it also happened in life sciences industry where I think they had some medical translation where there was the AI version for translation. Let me try and remember. The translation would have been take once a day before bed.
Yeah.
And in fact, AI translated it to take once a day before you die. So they, of course, had to recall that because it just takes the entire...
I love it.
It can have mistakes that are just irreparable.
Fatal.
So you have to be careful with these things, right?
But I think from a recruiter's perspective, we're starting to see the impact of that starting to come around again. So jobs are starting to open up again where, your whole teams were disbanded. So we're starting to see the impact of that, reverse a little. I don't know that it'll reverse fully, but time will tell.
Yeah, and certainly, again, for talent management, it's important to find people today in the localization industry or in the localization community. So also on the client side, not just on the supplier side, but to find people who have language expertise because they have a linguistic background or because they have been focused on language management for so many years, and people who can work effectively, closely, I should say, with data scientists, because you need both expertise. You need data and language expertise. And I'm always surprised when I hear some organizations, they recognize that language data is important for AI, but they give immediately the ownership to the CIO, to the CTO, and then, of course, it remains within the tech area. It remains within the tech space, and it gives, most of the time, it goes to data science. And in my previous jobs, I was working, my team, myself, we were working very closely with data scientists. So I know it's possible for people more on the language side to work closely with people on the data science side. So, but I'm still something which is, and you said it, Petra, things are going very fast for the moment. But I think eventually, I hope eventually that there will be more convergence because you do it in Acolad. But again, not everybody does it like Acolad. And, there should be more convergence between these two types of expertise. So data and language going together, not just going together at the end of the AI chain, but going together in the beginning of the AI chain when we start about data. When the first step, which is data creation or data acquisition, that must be, both expertise must be in the chain, in all steps, not just at the end. And I think you said Acolad does it. Great. So you lead by example, I would say. But also, Paula, we had that discussion.
That's right.
It's hard to find people who can work together like that and say, yes, in your organization, you say that, researchers and data scientists can work with linguists, but it seems that it's quite difficult. I don't know.
Yeah, no, back to the same things I said much earlier. Some organisations encourage the collaboration and they teach contextualisation, but others don't. I'm not trying to make this all sound it's either one thing or the other, but over the years, that's what I have seen in lots of different industries. Some organisations are just better at certain things than others.
But it depends on where you put the focus.
That's
And
it.
especially as AI has took such a forefront, corporations have to realize how prevalent it is. It's not just prevalent in the localization industry, but everywhere. And you can utilize it in so many ways, even just for your day-to-day job. You can make things more efficient, maybe not for everything, but you have to realize that things are shifting. And you need to get that in the hands of your employees. You need to help them understand how this will impact their work and how this can make their work even better. And in the localization industry, especially, you have to encourage that innovative mindset because in the end, innovation doesn't just come from technology, it comes from people. And you need to help them understand how they can use the tools and how they can come with ideas, how they can promote their ideas. And that's something that we've been doing in Acolad from quite a while back, but particularly with the whole ChatGPT surge. We had an ambassador program. We worked on different elements on learning prompt engineering, creating trainings around how we can use AI ethically. So these are all things that you should do as part of your organization and help your employees feel connected to these shifts in technology because it will only help people.
Focus is the perfect word. You use that. I think it's the perfect word.
Yeah.
So,
And well, I know it's difficult. It's a very difficult question. So, but if from your perspective, how do you see the future of the localization industry? The future being, let's say, 1 or 2 years from now. You mentioned, of course, that AI was moving very fast. So we know that AI has an impact on the localization industry, just like any industry. But how would you expect the localization industry to be in, let's say, 2 years from now? Would you see some major changes, or would you say we're going to maybe move a bit more slowly, but we're going to adapt ourselves to client expectations? What is your? I mean, I hate predictions. As someone said, predictions are difficult, certainly for the future. But it's what would you say if you had someone asking you, "Hey, Petra, what do you think about the localization industry in a couple of years from now?"
And can I throw in something on top of that? And where do you see the challenges?
Yeah,
but keep it as a fairly short term because I think
2 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking
1
even
year.
I was thinking even shorter than that. I'm thinking about the last 12 months, the difference, the position we're in now.
It's crazy. I mean, it changes every day. I mean, it's really tough. I think whatever I will say will be outdated by the time this is published. So.
But the other thing as well, that we don't always bear in mind is the political situation globally. That's actually going to have a massive impact on every industry.
Yeah.
So, as best you can.
I mean, tell me about it. Of course, DeepSeek I mentioned, but even just, and okay, I think us in the industry think about this, but for instance, the US executive order declaring the English language as official language in the US, people might not think about the implications, but there are actually implications. It's not just saying, yes, that's the language now, okay. There are implications to that as well. So yes, there are so many things changing very rapidly, which impact our industry, that makes it hard to predict. But I suppose a few things that I can think of from my perspective, and bear in mind the datedness of it really soon. I think people always are thinking about, will AI take my job? Will AI take localization entirely? I don't necessarily think that will happen, but it will more than likely change our roles and how we do things, how we use technology. This is not uncommon, though. I mean, we've gone through having MT in the loop. We've gone through a number of things within the localization. Things are shifting all the time, but I don't necessarily think it means, we can eliminate humans. And I think that's something people have to recognize, that the human element, it can enhance technology, and it is very important to keep in the loop. So having technology combined with the human excellence is going to remain very important. And especially if we consider all these industries we talked about, really regulated industries, AI will still have a hard time, in my opinion, to account for jurisdictional requirements when it comes to legal content or when it comes to creative. It's really difficult to be able to have that human element to AI, the way that we transfer emotion. And I might also once again talk about interpretation. If you have an interpreter, let's say, you're in the hospital and you don't speak the language because you're in a foreign country and you're in a really tough situation. Imagine an AI voice just telling you what the doctor is saying. Will that make you feel reassured and great? It's very different. You might not get that empathy that is important. And we know full well that when it comes to medical environments, it is very important how people feel in them being able to recover. It's a whole different concept there, but I think it contributes. You have to think about where technology can bring a benefit, but where the human touch is still incredibly important. So in that sense, having that change, things will change, roles will change, prompt engineering will become probably bigger and bigger. And I actually am really curious, Paula, what your experience is on that. But beyond that, the evolution in itself, I mentioned adaptive AI models that will probably come, and yes, small language models that is going to be essential for data privacy, especially the regulation and governance, I think will probably strengthen. We'll see how the EU AI Act actually shapes things, and how companies can implement it. I'm particularly curious about that when it comes to the localization industry. I think more than likely the small language models will be the key player in making sure that data privacy remains part of the process. But those are the key points that I can think of as for the future.
No, and I think the points that Petra made about the role of human is really key, because well, again, specifically in the life science industry, but also in other industries, you will always have to make a discrimination between what can be automated to some extent or to a large extent, and what can be, I would say, partially or slightly automated, just because it has a huge impact on human life or human experience. And I think that it's really interesting to see from that perspective, to see what's going on in the life science industry, where of course you have content that can be automated, like labeling, like some very scientific content, which it is well structured in a way which is in every sentence you have terminology, so you can automate that. And then you have, on the other side, you have patient facing content, which are everything that you read when you buy medication. You cannot just say, indeed, you cannot just automate all that. Or in the linguistic validation process, which is very specific in the life science industry, it's not just QA, it's much more than that. So in those types of content, you have to be very careful, because of course it cannot be just pushed to the limits of human experience, and I think that's the life science industry is a good example of that. But I think it will eventually, as you said, Petra, it's more like it has to be considered in other industries, regulated, of course, and non-regulated. Because even for the travel industry, I think that sometimes, if you are putting some description that is not attractive for your hotel or for your travel agency, humans will say, "Ooh, that smells like machine,"
But not only that, actually, it reminds me of, I feel like because a lot of companies nowadays think that, AI is so much better than MT, they can just push everything through LLM and that will be good enough. And some companies do actually do this. They don't realize the risks, and then there are repercussions where we don't talk about the very serious industries, even just talking about perhaps the entertainment industry, where I do see this happening. It has happened with a few companies that are just doing subtitling, and it can really become such a bad experience. And I speak of this because, of course, I'm Hungarian, so I have watched quite a few movies and series with subtitles. And so you can, if especially if you speak the language, then you can tell the difference, and that can be really annoying. It's just very confusing. But it has happened with Squid Game. I don't know if you guys know it. It was very popular a few years back. Apparently, the subtitling was so bad that it completely lost the cultural nuance.
Oh yeah.
And these are things that will continue to happen if that attention isn't given, and that actually impacts the whole experience. Why do you spend hundreds of thousands or millions in a production of something and then detriment the experience by not putting money into localization? It just doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah. Now, I am a fan of modernization, huge fan of modernization. I'm a huge fan of looking for ways to honestly make it as cost effective as possible. So I don't want to sound like I believe that we need to stand still. I don't want to stand still. It's to try and find a way to keep moving forward where humanity is protected, enterprise is protected, people's jobs are protected, maximising market opportunities are protected. Anyhow, sound like I'm on a soapbox here. Petra, I'm going to say a big thank you from us. And it's been hugely enjoyable and interesting. And if ever you feel we can help you in any way, either of us, please reach out. Happy to talk to you, give guidance around stuff that I know about, if ever it helps. I know Bruno's always very kind about things like that. So again, Petra is currently the head of product and solutions enablement at Acolad Group. So she has spoken about lots of very interesting things, and she's mentioned the way Acolad is moving forward. And I know she'd be happy to take any calls or inquiries. So
absolutely, I'd love to.
Yeah, and that's us done. Thank you. So
thank you.
Thank you. And
thank you very much.